July had boiled in Arizona, and my friend Tyler and I decided to take a road trip to break the monotony of our summer jobs. We were both 24, fresh out of college, and itching for an adventure that didn't involve spreadsheets or customer calls. Our destination was the Grand Canyon, but with a twist. We planned to camp in one of the less popular areas to really soak in the untouched beauty of the place. We packed Tyler's Jeep with enough supplies for a few days and hit the road. The drive was long but exciting, with old road trip tunes and TripAdvisor reviews that were gearing up the anticipation of the views. We reached a destination late in the day, with the sun casting in a golden hue across the unending expanse. Having made the camp, we decided to get to know the new territory. Then we remembered that more isolated it could not have been. Isolated miles from the next tourist spot, just what we wanted, or so we thought. Dinner was then prepared over the open fire, and the stars above us seemed way brighter than the lighting we are used to in the city. We with the rest of the group talked of life, of dreams we dreamt within us for some time, of the uncertain future ahead. It was perfect till a piercing scream shattered the tranquility of the night. Our hearts, they say, skidded to a halt as the sound reached far across the empty space, all too human to be ignored, too distressed to sound like an animal. We hesitated at first before grabbing a flashlight and moving in the direction of the scream, the sense of adventure having given way to growing apprehension. The beams from our flashlights seemed to have barely enough strength to jab into the darkness, moving shadows about. It seemed forever before we found the source. A woman alone, her clothing half-torn, face etched in fear, grabbed my arm and implored for help. She said she'd been on a day hike with her husband, but had become separated from him and hadn't seen him for hours. We returned to camp, relieved that finally we had found someone, and set out to help her contact the park rangers in the morning. But as the night wore on, things seemed to get off. With each spin in her tail, the teller bent a bit, her eyes flicking about, never meeting ours. Tyler and I caught sight of each other, sympathy quick over the current shading into suspicion. We took turns watching, the unhappy about our new guest. I took the first shift, sitting by the dying fire while Tyler and the woman slept in their respective tents. Noticing a movement. Okay, at the corner of my eyes, I saw the movement. But it is not from the woman or Tyler, it is just something beyond the fire. Right away, I seized the flashlight, and to get two eyes staring at me, but at the very split second they disappear in the darkness. I assured myself it was just a deer, or some other such creature that could not possibly harm one. But still, the unease sunk into my bones. I woke Tyler for his watch and forced myself not to let it show. As I crawled into my tent, I could hear whispers riding the night air. I told myself it was just the wind. But here they were coming out of the tent in morning light. The sight was a mess. Tyler's was open and empty. She was gone. I called for Tyler, not even rewarded with the echo of my own voice. The Jeep, our lifeline, had been tampered with and wouldn't start. Reality smacks you upside the side of your head, and a sense of panic sets in. We are stuck, surrounded by howling wolves, missing Tyler, and the woman we sought to help has been driven back. The very isolation I had craved had now become my greatest fear. I was left in an expanse of wilderness all alone, with knowledge only on what had befallen my friend and how I might make my way back into civilization. An adventure suddenly turned into an absolute nightmare, and I left myself wondering if I would come from the Grand Canyon alive. The sun was lazily heading up, meaning only the temperatures were going to hike, and I knew time was running out. My immediate thought ran to search out for Tyler, yet not knowing where to start with, it felt more like finding a needle in the haystack. And the disappearance of the little woman added even much more pressure into the situation. Questions all cascading into my head. Was she in danger as well? Or was she the reason Tyler was now missing? First out of the pack were the supplies. Food, water, and most importantly, the satellite phone we boarded with if a really pressing issue was to arise. My relief in finding it still inside my pack was short-lived when I discovered it had been broken. Intentionally or unintentionally, it didn't matter. cut off from the outside world? No. I'm pretty sure I left markers back in our camp note cards in a waterproofed bag explaining who we are and our predicament, all attached to a small flag of SOS that we'd folded. If anyone found them, they'd surely infer something was up. With that done, I started off in the direction in which we'd found the woman, hoping that it would take me to Tyler. The ground was rough and unloving. With every passing hour, hope of finding Tyler alive chained to its sinking destiny. It did not take long before I stubbed across a clue in the form of a piece of fabric from Tyler's shirt, stuck under a branch. Evidently, he had passed this very way. I followed the track as best as possible, taking notes of my path and ensuring that the venture was not futile. But just as the sun was dipping and the sky was lighting up, gold and red, a great pit opened right at the bottom of my stomach. This brought me no closer to Tyler. The idea of spending another night alone in this eerie woods turned your shiver up another notch. I decided at that point to pack it in for the night and head back out first thing in the morning. That night was probably the longest in my whole life. Every sound to which I approached, I jumped literally, and from any shadow, one gets scared. I hardly slept, constantly avoiding movement, waiting for the worst. It feels like deep isolation, a constant reminder of how defenseless I really am. And the dawn broke with that slim hope. We kept on hiking in a different direction, calling out for Tyler every few steps. Hours wore on, and no sign of Tyler and the mystery woman materialized. Elation and exhaustion took both forms. Suddenly, there came the dawning realization of the fact that maybe what I was carrying could light up my life, but might also pave the way for the truth that I could never find out what had transpired with Tyler, and was a weight I wasn't ready to carry. It was a voice faint in the distance. Tyler. Adrenaline had power in my blood for the second time that night, made my tired legs take me running, and there was Tyler, limping toward me with a look of relief plastered on his face. It had been the woman's doing, he explained, but she hadn't been alone. In fact, they were part of a big group of people living off the grid, and in no certain terms did outsiders receive a welcome. Tyler had managed to escape during the night, using the wilderness skills he had learned over the years. There was no time wasted at all. We made some markers in the path that we took back to the camp, and using those that I had left, we got the Jeep started with the knowledge that Tyler hasn't cars, and without delay rode up to the nearest ranger station and reported everything. The rangers wrote our statement down, and then said they were going to go check it out, as Tyler and I never received a word whether they ever actually found the group or the woman. We both promised each other not to do this any more deep in isolation, just in much more crowded or more populated areas, cause Grand Canyon has left its scars on both of us, ever reminding of how thin the line between adventure and peril really is. They never looked the same on our way back. It looked like we were seeing the whole world now, but through a different lens. In other words, that had happened with us because it changed us and taught us much about preparedness and maybe about caution, about friendship, that we simply cannot take for granted. We had made it this time, but we were in luck, where the wilderness, by the very nature of its exquisite looks, kept the dangers at bay, rising above the same nature in regard to this. It was a lesson of tough to forget. My friend Nathan and I were always up for an adventure, and our camping trips were legendary among our group. This particular trip, when I was 22 and he was 23, took us to a secluded part of the Appalachian Trail. It was a spot Nathan had been to a couple of times before, but it was my first time there. We both had flexible jobs that allowed us to take time off during the week, which was perfect, considering the weekend jam the place used to have with so many campers. Nathan, the local, was the person who was supposed to make his way to chalk out the route and to take the streamers requisite in the form of the materials from our workshop. We halted our car in the space adjoining to the ranger station, and the halcyon deviancy started over there. We found a real clearing to make camp after a real long walk that took us virtually into the wilderness further than I've ever been before. It was a really pretty place, surrounded with stand-up trees that dwarfed us, leaving just enough space for our tents and the fire, with the small camping stove a little afterthought among our essentials. Setting up camp was made easy by the expert that Nathan is. In no time at all, he had pulled up his tent, while I had my fair share of fumbling with mine. Then, the day started to dim as the sun set, and we kindled the tita so that the crackle of fire would now be heard in the open clearing once again. Being the cook that he certainly was, Nathan had earlier fired up chunks of veggies and sausages to feast on, a simple yet sumptuous meal befitting the backwoods. Our bear spray lay handy, and no small part of it for the bear, he told me, with assurances that they were rare in these parts, but generally just in case. He often said, though, that the worry in the woods wasn't with the wildlife, but it was about the other people. And so the rest of the evening sailed past in a haze of togetherness as we cracked jokes, laughing mostly at ourselves. Nathan had done a setup for his playlist on some good classic tracks of that night, rock, especially for us. One-on-one, there was nothing else. Everything just faded into the background. As darkness enveloped our campsite, we decided to bring out the playing cards. We were seated on an intense competition of Uno, and both of us just stopped in the middle, feeling rather than hearing a presence. I paused the music, and the silence that came flooding in was profound. Then there it was, clear as day, soft murmuring in a voice that was unmistakable, along with footsteps. Nathan's eyes met mine, and a silent communication of unease passed between us. Outside the campfire line, the sounds make something else into pitch darkness, and we can't make out the sounds. When I probed just outside the perimeter of our campfire light with a flashlight, trying to reach the source of the sound, they disappeared as fast as they had come. Nathan chuckled, saying that it was probably some random hiker, yet the idea of someone just standing around so close to our camp without announcing them was bothering. We tried to take up our game, but the music had been turned off. We were all starting to wind down and get into that comfortable feeling when a stick landed with a thud in the middle of our sight, obviously thrown. Nathan's shout into the darkness was met by silence, and then the retreating sound of somebody walking away. But it was better to be left put than to risk getting lost in the night. We agreed to at least have the bear spray near and somebody to keep an eye inside. I suggested it should be kept on turns for us to stay awake, but Nathan brushed it off. He was anyway too riled up for any sleep. Sometime in the night, I awoke to a chilling sensation, the feeling of being watched. I then groaned and glanced up, groggily, to see what looked like a silhouette at the entrance of my tent. "Nathan?" I whispered, assuming it was his turn to come and knock me out for the watch. Instead, light footsteps did nothing in reply, but then I swore the zipper of the tent had to close. A wave of fear went over me as I realized Nathan should be by the fire, not silently standing over me. I got out of the tent to find the campfire empty and just some far-off burnt ember. Everything about the camp appeared to have been vacated by everyone. Nathan's tent, its door and windows zipped, left Nathan sleeping a peaceful sleep unaware of my distress. Then the full terror hit me. Someone else had been in our camp. All I remember was that I had to wake him up and narrated the scenes that had just taken place. We then lived the rest of the night in his tent. The eerie hum from before came floating back through the trees, a haunting lullaby that seemed as though it might be laughing at our fear. By dawn, we were exhausted but alive. We packed just as fast, more than anxious to get out of those woods. I tried to process the events of the night in absolute silence until everybody was bound up in their thoughts. We had never gone back into the wilderness for camping thereafter. Since then, Nathan and I never searched for another camping adventure back in the wilderness. That once place of escape and wonder now cast a shadow of fear upon that place. She said, of that night and the unexplained events, the things not said and not seen, of the lurking presence and haunting humming have stayed with us, a chilling reminder like cold death, that sometimes, the most terrifying stories are the ones without an end. It had always been an annual event for my college friends and me. For one weekend, Somewhere out in the remote wilds of Oregon, it was our chance to join with others who were similarly disposed to escape the grinds of exams and papers by which most of the rest of the year was defined. We just wanted the peace in the woods, the simplicity of a life off-grid, albeit for a few days. This trekking trip took a turn into the domain of the unexplained, making more questions than answers as to what people are safe from if they step out into the woods. The drive up was filled with its usual banter and anticipation. A journey into the forest was bound to transport me back in time. This year, though, we found a new spot, deeper into the forest than we'd ever gone before. It's left untouched, Alex had pronounced, a twinkle of emerald brightness in green irises. And he wasn't wrong. The further one got from civilization, the more surreal the beauty became. Towering pines and silence so profound it feels like there is no world. We had set camp in a small clearing, surrounded by the impenetrable darkness of the forest. It was late afternoon when they started seeping through the trees and painting anything and everything in a glow of gold. One day had seconded another without a storm in a teacup. We hiked, cooked by the fire, and sat around it as darkness swallowed what the day held. We told our stories into the fire, peering at the stars, so vivid against the dark sky, as we sat around the campfire. But as we turned into sleep, something very salient happened. The forest, which was very teeming with nocturnal sounds for the whole day, seemed to close its breath at our noticing time. Seemed to, at least, at first. No sounds of crickets, no rustling of nocturnal life creatures moving in the underbrush. The mounting unease came to rest over the group. We didn't seem to dwell on it but shrugged that off as nothing else but the strangeness of the place. We crawled into the tents, whispering soft goodnights, though sleep was a while in coming. The silence was oppressive. This peace was finally broken at about 2 in the morning by a rallying sound that sent us dashing out of our tents. It had come from just outside the tree line at the outer perimeter of our camp. Without thinking, we huddled together, scanning the darkness with our flashlights for that which could possibly have made that sound. "Hello," I called. My voice felt small and hesitant amidst the huge silence with which that scream was greeted. But in response there was indeed none. There was no more sound, just that quiet one as though the scream had not occurred. "Wait, we should do something. Someone might have lost their way, might have been hurt." She speaks with a sense of duty wrestling with an unknown fear. Finally, we decide to wait for the first light. Trying out luck in the godforsaken, moonless night of the unknown woods ultimately ended up being foolhardy, particularly shortly after such a chilling sound. Morning brought no answers. The forest remained silent, devoid of the usual sounds of birds and small animals. The boy had been so uneasy and nervous the night before that he could hardly take any stuff from the inside of the clearing. The excitement for the trip overrode the uneasiness from the earlier night, and slowly we packed up camp. It was only as we were about to leave that I saw something at the edge of the clearing. Footprints, human feet, unshod feet, going off into the woods, then stopping as if the person had fallen off the edge of the world. We reported what we had seen and heard to the nearest ranger station, but their search turned up nothing. They had never had anyone reported lost, and no other sign of anyone being there before us was ever found. The trip ended with a kind of mystery hanging over that night. Being the intelligent person amongst our group, nobody spoke any word. We discussed under our breaths about this thing, what must have transpired, but not anything useful came about to help out. The silent woods kept their secret, a reminder of the mysteries that lie in wait in places untamed, wild, beyond our reach. It would be an experience that united us in a way none of our previous adventures had, a shared brush with the unexplainable, the story that would always be ours.